Well, hello everyone, and welcome into another episode of the Payne and Drain Show. I'm your host Zach Payne. With me, as always, is my co-host Alex Drain. And after a bye week, the we got to watch a lot more around the NFL as the Lions rested up, and there was a lot of weird games that happened this weekend. And we're here to talk about it with all you as well as preview the Cowboys game and talk about where the Lions stand at this point in time. Alex, how are we doing today?
Pretty good. Return of the NHL season as we record this. October, really these next couple of weeks, I think is the best sports part of the year in North America. I mean, we got baseball playoffs, NFL, college football season ongoing, NHL getting going, and not too long till the NBA. There's that like 1 week in late October where the World Series overlaps with the NBA where you get all four, but never a shortage of stuff to watch this time of year, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the Tigers are still kicking around in the playoffs too, so all of Detroit remains on fire.
Yeah, Thursday night is the Red Wings home opener, like going on concurrently. It's a 6 p.m. game four of Tigers in Cleveland. So it's quite a time.
Yeah. Now, this is gonna be structured a little bit differently than our normal episodes because again, there was no Lions game, so we're gonna jump in first to the NFL Weekly Roundup here, and we like to start with the NFC North teams because that is what matters most to Lions fans. And starting off in London, the Minnesota Vikings defeat the New York Jets. They hold on. They almost have another second half collapse, but for the second straight week, they survive a furious attempt. And not only that, they are 5-0, and the ramifications of this game are as of this morning when we're recording this. Jets coach Robert Saleh has been fired, and it came out that it is due to him contemplating firing offensive coordinator Nathaniel Hackett, which means there is some heavy shenanigans going on with Aaron Rodgers in this. His fingerprints are all over this. The Vikings made the Jets implode essentially.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. I wasn't that shocked to see Robert Saleh fired. I mean, it's not like he was a great. He wasn't terrible. He wasn't great either. I mean, 20 and 36 through 4 seasons is not ideal, but he hasn't been given the greatest hand thus far. Definitely interesting though, and for our purposes, the Vikings, I didn't get to see a ton of this game, but looking at the box score, Sam Darnold maybe a little bit of a come down game, so to speak. 14 of 31 for only 179, no touchdowns and one pick. Not his best game. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. I mean, they also only rushed for 82 yards. They didn't get a ton of offense, but they got enough to win the game, and they got several long field goals. Will Reichard, I think a 53-yarder and a 54-yarder on paper is the difference. I don't know if you have more descriptive thoughts.
So the thing for me is this wasn't necessarily a come down game for Darnold. He looked fine. He looked a lot more like the Sam Darnold that we've kind of grown accustomed to, where he's not spectacular, he's not horrible, he's just kind of mediocre. He made the throws he needed to in the first half. In the second half, some of those throws were getting away from him. And it's just going to be something that I'm more so taking note of the fact that Aaron Jones is hurt. That impacts the rushing offense a lot. And he's week to week, so he's going to be questionable for the Lions game in week 7. It's just more of a case of the Vikings' second half offense has not been very inspiring. They've done a very good job at getting leads early when they've been able to script drives with Kevin O'Connell. But once they kind of get into the thick of the game, it hasn't been the most consistent production from them. And part of that is Darnold's lack of an ability to improvise. Part of that is just the overall play calling not being as sound as it is on the opening drives, which is the case for most teams around the league. I don't know. The Vikings are a weird team. I think they are due for a letdown week. The problem is the next game is going to be against the Lions, and I don't know if they're going to have a letdown. They're going to be up for that game coming out of a bye week, so it might take a while. There's going to be at least once or twice this year where the Vikings offense definitely lets them down, though. So it's
Well,
going to be, yeah.
in you know, optimistic sense, they got off to a great start a few years back, and then it didn't really follow up in the second half. We kind of forget, I think, in the NFL season that because it's not that many months long, that it is still long. It's not the 6 month march that the other sports are. There isn't 162 games like baseball, but a lot can change over the course of the year. And a 5-0 start is nice, but there's a lot of weeks to go. I don't love that the Lions have to face them coming out of the bye, but it is what it is, and they'll get some time to scout the Vikings at least. You have 2 weeks now to kind of look at the tape.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing is, the game in Minnesota every year is always a brutal one. I'm fine to, they can have their bye week, they can get it out of the way. I want to get all the road divisional games out of the way as soon as possible every year. That's just my mindset because I want to have the home games later in the season when you're kind of ramping up towards the more meaningful games. As for the Jets, I was a little surprised that Saleh was let go, not because necessarily he's done a phenomenal job. Obviously, the Jets have had their woes over the years, but Robert Saleh was brought in to be a defensive coach. The Jets, while they had a rough stretch against the Niners and this season, they are still one of the best defenses in the league. He's done exactly what he said he was going to do, which is make the Jets one of the best defenses in the league, and now the overall kind of what everyone's saying is how does this fix the offense? And it doesn't. It's going to make the defense worse. It's going to make the cohesion on the team worse because now they don't have a head coach. And it's really going to be the Aaron Rodgers show even more than it already has been.
I didn't see who's the interim coach. Do we know?
I didn't see. No, It might be Hackett just because he has head coach experience.
That would be very
Which,
funny, I have to say. Speaking of Hackett in the offense, 54 pass attempts for Rodgers and 14 rushing attempts.
yep. And now, granted, Brees Hall has had a tough stretch the last few games, but he is still one of the better running backs in the league. So it's curious. And Braylon Allen has also been amazing to start the year. Like they have two very good running backs, and they aren't using either because Aaron Rodgers has to throw the ball at least 40 times a game.
Looks like the defensive coordinator is the interim coach, Jeff Ulbrich.
Okay. I mean, nothing's going to change with the Jets. Like they're done. as long
It sure seems that way.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is, they were an Aaron Rodgers final drive away from potentially being 3-2, and instead Rodgers throws a terrible interception, and now they're 2-3, and they fired their head coach, and it's just, I don't know, man. They just seem directionless right now.
Margins are very fine in football. These teams in the NFL are so close. A couple plays make you or break you.
Yeah, exactly. Moving on, the Green Bay Packers took on the Los Angeles Rams, and Jordan Love,
Hey,
he
he
had
is cementing himself as the chaos quarterback of this season because yet again, another week where everything is happening when he is dropping back to pass.
most notably, he had himself a Kyler Murray moment in trying to avoid a safety. He desperately heaves the ball out of the end zone right into a defender's arms for a 2-yard pick six. It's a very rare play in football that you don't really see. He also had he. It's just very odd. He was missing a lot of throws to Dontavian Wicks, and also Dontavian Wicks had a really bad game because he forgot that to be a wide receiver you need to use your arms to catch the ball. He was getting open like crazy, but he just could not catch. It's just a very weird. The Packers are the ultimate enigma right now because they have all the tools to be a very good team, and all those tools are present for half the game, and then all those tools are very not present the rest of it.
Yeah, it's really kind of touch and go with them at the moment. You see the flashes, but I wasn't really impressed with their defense in this game. There was a lot of talk about their defense, and they brought in a new DC, if I remember correctly, reshuffled some things around. They, uh, made some changes, bringing in Xavier McKinney. But this is a Rams team that's pretty beat up, especially on the offensive
Very.
line. This is a Rams team that scored 18 against the Bears in the prior week, and for a large stretch of this game, the Rams were moving the ball with relative ease. They had a 66-yard drive end in turnover and downs, 55-yard drive ended in a touchdown, then 26-yard drive they punted on, 46-yard drive a fumble. I mean, there was a stretch all the way down to a 91-yard touchdown drive later. There really weren't three and outs from the Rams in this game. They were able to move the ball, able to plow their way into Packer territory, and then either they'd come up short or they'd get points. But it just wasn't the crispest showing from Green Bay's defense. And on offense, again, it's here and there. And that interception from Love continues to kind of call into question his ability to handle pressure and what he's looking like when there are rushers in his face. Because it's not just that he'd made a desperation heave to avoid a safety. He made the heave with his upper body parallel to the ground. He was leaning, like bent over, about to fall out the back of the end zone, and then tossed it sidearm to a defender for an interception. If you look at his completion chart for this game, that interception was behind the line of scrimmage. So if you didn't see the game, you'd think it was like a intercepted bubble screen or something like that. Just a very strange play, and there were good moments from him, but there's also just a lot of kind of, F it, he's down there somewhere sort of throw. And sometimes those work because Jaden Reed in particular is really good.
The most
And
random jump ball receiver, like elite jump ball receiver in the league. Like this is like when Patrick Mahomes used to throw jump balls to Tyreek Hill and it would just work out. Jaden
yeah,
Reed is like mossing three people at a time and it makes no sense. Like I can't
Jaden
comprehend it.
Jaden Reed is a dog. I'll give him credit for that. But it just feels like these are habits that are going to lead to negative outcomes when you're playing better teams, right? And you would hope that if he's doing this when they face the Lions, that Kirby Joseph can lick his chops, right? Because that's the kind of stuff that a competent deep safety should be able to take advantage of. And they have a smart offensive coach. They have some good receivers. And Love has talent, but an offense kind of predicated around just chucking stuff up, especially when pressure comes, and just hoping that it gets caught by your receivers doesn't feel like the most sound game plan. So I think Green Bay is still a solid team, but they have been a little underwhelming to me when Love has played.
Yeah, I think the Packers are going to be in a similar position to what they were last year, which is they're going to get to the last 5 or 6 games of the year and they're going to be pushing for a wild card spot. I don't see them really as threats, like enormous threats to win the division at this point in time because for as good as they have looked in stretches, they just have been so inconsistent and pretty much all of my fears of them have kind of evaporated because everything I was scared of has not happened, which was Love playing like he did down the stretch. He hasn't. The defense taking a step with the new defensive coordinator. It hasn't. And the weapons.
That could happen later in the year, right? I mean,
It could happen. No.
especially on the defensive side, like you have to give him some credit. It's a new coach. It might take time, but to your point, probably not soon enough to salvage a division when the Vikings are 5-0 and the Lions are
Yeah,
3-1.
because at the end of the day, I think the Lions are going to win 11 plus games, and the Vikings have started 5-0, which means you can probably pencil them in for 11 plus wins. I don't see the Packers being able to make it 3 11 plus wins teams in the division. It's just such a tall order for like
Yeah,
it doesn't
hard
happen.
hard to see.
Yeah. But we'll have to keep monitoring them over the course of the season because they are a very young team, which means that they are similar to last year. They are capable of having things click later in the season, and we'll see what that looks like. Now, moving on, this is a more broad one applying to a few teams, but the rookie quarterbacks are starting to settle into their respective situations and playing their best ball. Caleb Williams lit up the Carolina Panthers, which justice. That's like the Panthers
Yeah.
deserve that. Bo Nix is quietly looking like the second best rookie quarterback right now, behind, of course, Jaden Daniels, who continues to light the world on fire. And this is a period of time. I don't have a name for it, but it's essentially the post like start of year bump for rookies where you come in, you have your rookie quarterback. First few games are kind of a wash because they're completely new. There's new defensive concepts that they haven't really seen, and it's going to take time for them to adjust. We saw that with all of the starters so far. Bo Nix had a few awful games. Caleb Williams had a few awful games. Jane Daniels had a few mediocre games. And now we're in a part of the season where there isn't a ton of tape out on them, and they're starting to figure things out. The offense is kind of catering to them a little bit better, and they're lighting the world on fire for a little bit. And we're going to just see how long each of them can keep this up before defenses start to adjust and have some more film on them to attack.
Yeah, Bo Nix played a nice game against the Raiders. Season stats don't look great, but it's really those first two games where he had two interceptions in both. last couple weeks starting to look better. I'm intrigued. I still don't really know if he's got the gunslinger attributes, right? Still, for the most part, a lot of shorter passes, but we were pretty high on Broncos defense last year, and they held the Bucks to 7. They held the Steelers to 13. They held the Jets to 9, Raiders to 18. That unit looks legit, and they're showing enough signs of life on offense that maybe they can be in the wild card hunt. I mean, we won't get to see it because it's going to overlap with the Lion game, but Chargers Broncos this upcoming week is like already a very interesting game for AFC
Yeah.
wild card positioning.
Yeah, and for my money, I think Patrick Surtain is the best corner in the league. He's been like CB1 on my board for the last 2 years probably, and he had a 100-yard pick six in this game as well as another interception later in the game. It's weird that the Broncos defense has gotten better after losing Justin Simmons, who is one of the best deep ball safeties in the league. But that's just the nature of it. They've had some great play from Riley Moss opposite Sertan at corner. And like that unit, just they don't have an elite pass rusher, but they just kind of get it done by committee. Zach Allen is having a really good start to the year. They're just blitzing a lot more to create pressure. It's that whole manufactured pressure that I remember we talked about, like Lions fans would talk about with Matt Patricia back in the day, where it's like, oh, you can manufacture pressure, and that he never did. The Broncos are actually doing that. Vance Joseph needs to be commended for the job he's doing there. The Broncos are a team that, on paper, should be awful. I think I had them penciled in as one of the bottom 5 or 6 teams in the league, and they are surprising me right now. Granted, Troy Franklin had a brutal drop in this game, which would have made Bo Nix's air yards look a lot better because it was wide open, like 50 yards downfield, and it just went right through the hands. But yeah, the Broncos are a fun young team, which is not something you've been able to say about them for the last half decade or so.
Shout out Riley Moss. He was really good at Iowa. All the talk last year about Cooper DeJean and the return of the white corner, and it turns out Riley Moss beat him to it, who was a fellow Iowa guy, a little bit older. So I really liked watching him play. He was a ball hawk with the cleverly named Hawkeyes. So good to see him performing. As for Caleb Williams, my first thought with the Bears, by the way, I didn't really look at their schedule properly until this weekend when I saw them beating up on the Panthers. What a bizarre schedule. The first 6 weeks is like the easiest hand you could ever be dealt. And then it's just a nonstop murderer's row after that. Their first 6 weeks includes the entire AFC South, which they will finish up this week against Jacksonville, as well as a beat up Rams team, and then the Panthers. And then after they get done playing the Jags, they play Washington on the road, which now suddenly looks very difficult. Cardinals in Arizona. Patriots, okay, that one's easier. And then to finish, Packers, Vikings, Lions, Niners, Vikings, Lions, Seahawks, Packers.
Have fun. Whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? It's funny that it's a gauntlet just because all of the NFC North teams are really good right now.
Yep. Yep.
So the Bears conceivably could have like 6 or 7 wins this season and go 0-6 in the division. I don't think that'll happen. They're obviously like the divisional games are always close and they seem to have the Lions number. So I might pencil them in for at least 2 wins in the division, but that's like insane final stretch of the year. Caleb Williams, buddy, have fun.
Yeah, we're gonna learn a lot more about him in the coming weeks, but obviously nice for Bears fans to see him ball out against the only minor league team in the NFL at this point in time. So about Washington, I don't know how much more we learned this week. The Browns look pretty bad.
Oh,
Jaden Daniels continues to play
the Browns are
well.
dead.
Yeah,
Like
they
it is the Deshaun like this is a conversation that we have to have. Is the Deshaun Watson trade the worst trade in sports history?
it's got to be up there. It's got to be up there because I think what makes it worse is the contract associated, right? Like that's the
There's
biggest
no way
thing,
out.
right? So like I was thinking about this the other day because I was watching the MLB playoffs. I was thinking about the Mookie Betts Dodgers Red Sox trade. It's like a lot of those lopsided trades you think about tend to be like one player who you gave away this great player and then you got back nothing in return, or you paid too much for a guy and you gave away something great or that kind of thing. But the Watson trade is so interesting because not just did they give away everything, They then got a guy who is awful and then have to pay him for 5 years at an cuttable contract. Like it's that fascinating marriage between not just did they give up too much, but the thing they got was terrible, right? Like the Deshaun contract would be viewed as one of the worst contracts in history, even if he'd just been a free agent signing. If they just gotten him with no players given up to do it, the fact that they had to give up all those draft picks to do it, and if you want to factor in the opportunity cost of losing Baker Mayfield, who is playing extremely well right now for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, it's a combination of so many factors that are the worst aspects of other worst trades in various sports leagues that I think at this point it's gotta be top five at least. You'd have to sit down and sketch out the other options, but man, oh man.
Yeah, that trade has single-handedly set the Browns back a decade. And if you recall, the Browns a decade ago were approaching the second winless season in NFL history. It's they need to nuke that franchise. Jimmy Haslam, enjoy your tire fire. Um,
Well, the one thing I'll say about Washington, they play the Ravens this week in the DMV matchup. That one will be fascinating. I think that's our best test because you look at this Commanders team and they played a Cardinals team I think is decent and they blew them out. That's impressive. But they beat these Ohio teams that are really struggling in Cincinnati and Cleveland. They beat the Giants who are kind of a joke and then they played the Bucks and got smoked. So it's still that sort of how good are they? Now they play the Ravens, and I think that this will be an interesting litmus test for Washington. I'm very curious about that score.
well, I'm gonna hang on you calling the Giants a joke because now it's time for everyone's favorite. Is the Lions hangover a real thing? As the New York Football Giants, sans Malik Neighbors, go into Seattle and defeat them, thanks in large part to a blocked field goal at the end of the game to secure a win. Um, it might be a thing. It might be a thing.
The evidence is pretty strong at this point in time, not just because do the teams the Lions play the next week not play as well. They get smoked by teams no one's expecting, right? The Bucks get crushed by was that the Denver, right? That
Yeah.
was the next week they played. I mean, that one no one necessarily saw coming. The Seahawks game, pretty surprising. Uh, the previous week with the Cardinals getting crushed by Washington, it's
And the
just
Rams got crushed by the Cardinals.
yeah, each week it's not just that they lose by like 30 points. And
And
I don't
I
know.
I do want to also point out the Seahawks Giants game was only as close as it was because the Seahawks had a 100-yard fumble return for a touchdown.
Did you see the stat on that this weekend that this was the first week in NFL history with two 100+ yard defensive touchdowns?
Yeah, it's like the weirdest stat ever. I don't know who dug that out, but I mean, cool.
We salute you.
Yeah, it's but no, like the Seahawks should not have been in this game. They were in this game for complete. They played awful all game. The Giants were taking it to them without their starting running back or number one wide receiver, and they end up winning thanks in large part to a blocked field goal. But again, the Seahawks were fortunate to be in that game. So the fact that I kind of count that as them getting their teeth kicked in a little.
Yeah, you have to think so. And this leads us to another very interesting game this week, which is taking place in 2 days. Niners Seahawks on Thursday night. Very, very interesting now. The
The
2-3
below
San
500,
Francisco
yeah.
Niners. Yeah, against 3-2 Seattle. And I'm curious about that just because you look at the Seahawks schedule. Outside of the Lions, I mean, they play the Broncos week one. Maybe the Broncos are legit now, but Pats, we didn't learn much about them from that game. And Dolphins, sans Tua is not really a notable game to discuss. So they haven't really had the toughest of tests. And on paper, the Niners are, but the Niners also haven't played well. So the Thursday night game's often a bit of a stinker a lot of weeks, but that one is extremely intriguing.
Yeah, and the Niners being 2-3 was, I don't think, on anyone's bingo card. They've obviously been beat up with a lot of injuries. Christian McCaffrey is in a land far, far away trying to heal up. Um, the Niners have like almost essentially taken themselves out of the running for the number one seed in the NFC with this start, because they essentially need to lose no more than two games the rest of the season it's a tall order for a first place schedule, and you know,
Yeah, they have a really difficult schedule the rest of the way. I mean, they had the Seahawks game this week. If they lose that one, they're already at 4 losses. Then you get the Chiefs after that. Not the easiest game. Then you get the Cowboys, where we'll talk about them, but that's at least a decent team. At the Buccaneers, that's not a pushover either. At the Packers a few weeks after that. At the Bills after that. I mean, not to mention Lions on December 30th. This is
yeah,
this is a tough schedule. It's really hard to see them getting the number one seed right now.
and you know what? To even go one step further, like if if things don't fall their way, we might be looking at that Week 17 game as the Niners have to win it to even be in the playoffs.
There's a
I
world
don't
where
think
that's yeah.
it better than 0%. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think we are going to be looking at that game as instead of them winning, like maybe they'll win the division, maybe they won't, but it's going to be jostling for which wildcard spot they or the Seahawks get.
Yeah, I mean, I came into the year thinking, oh, that game could decide the number one seed, that sort of thing, but not at the
Suddenly, the
moment.
Vikings games are gonna.
Yeah,
uh,
I'm not that worried about the Niners. I mean, their losses have all been pretty close. 6 points to the Vikings, 3 points to the Rams, 1 point to the Cardinals. They've had injuries. I think they're still a good team, but as you mentioned, the regular season results do matter, and for playoff positioning and that sort of thing, even if you are unlucky and you just lose a lot of close games, that can cost you the division. It can cost you, especially with this schedule. So still on the lookout for them, but it has been surprising, especially the way they lost that game. They were up, I think, 13 points at halftime. Seemed like, oh, cruise control, and I don't believe they scored in the second half. So,
Well, there's a big asterisk on that because the reason that they didn't score in the second half is Jake Moody got hurt, so they were not allowed to kick field goals anymore. They ended up having to go on for a 4th and 22 from the Cardinals like 35 or something because they don't have a kicker, and
yeah,
so they would have won if Jake Moody was healthy. I would stand by that, but
well,
yeah.
sucks to be them. By the way, do you remember the year that Ndamukong Suh kicked an extra point? Or were you too young
Yeah.
for that?
No, I remember. Oh, did he shank it or did he make it?
He
I
he
forget.
missed it. He missed it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was close, but he missed it. One of the
yeah.
funnier Lion moments of all
I
time.
there's been some weird, because there's the one in Kansas City. Was it Justin Reed who occasionally just kicks for no reason? Um, I don't know. You would think you would want a more traditionally athletic looking player to kick that than your star defensive tackle. But hey, I mean, to each their own. And Ndamukong Suh was one of the more athletic players at that position, so it almost worked.
Hey, he had a foot that he used to step on people, so
Exactly, he's used to
and
it.
can kick people, so he got some training.
No,
Any other games from this weekend to discuss?
not particularly. We'll talk about the Cowboys in a little bit. They had a very uninspiring win in a very weird weather game in Pittsburgh, but
I guess one just to mention is are the Bengals cooked? 1-4.
I think they're cooked. Yeah, I mean Burrow and Chase and Higgins all looked great in this game, and they still managed to lose to a good Ravens team, but they lost because their coaching staff decided that the 40-yard line was close enough in overtime to try a field goal, and they completely just didn't try to move the ball at all after that. So
Yeah, I don't
also they're
know.
missing
Well,
DJ Reader.
that is that is fair. Before the season, I was like, someone could get a bet on Ben Johnson as 2025 Bengals head coach. Still plausible, but the Lions offense will need to keep their momentum going. They got in week 4 because through 3 weeks his stock was
Yeah,
maybe falling a little bit.
yeah. Well, speaking of the Lions, we'll now kind of pivot to a bit of a review of where the Lions stand right now. And, when we go through each game, we usually talk about the offense and the defense and the game through, whatever. As far as this offense has been through 4 weeks, we've seen kind of the highs and the lows, but the most recent evidence that we have is that the Lions offense looks to be clicking again on all cylinders, and we've seen pretty much every weapon be involved except for Sam Laporta in a major way. But I don't know, where are you standing with where the Lions offense is at as a whole right now?
I think the offense is in a decent spot, honestly. I think a lot of it just hinges on Jared Goff. And that's not surprising thing to say about the NFL. This is a quarterback's league to some degree, and the level of quarterback play you get is going to determine a lot. I think their performances, certainly against Arizona, certainly against Tampa Bay, could have looked very, very different with better quarterback play, and we wouldn't be having many conversations at all about the offense. Uh, is it up to par? That kind of thing that we were doing. He was missing a lot of easy stuff, and it was great to see a huge bounce back in Seattle. And I think that's one of the biggest storylines going into Dallas because you need him to play well. And it's a long season, and I do believe he can get back to that. And if he can, this should be a really good offense because the pass protection is something I'd like to see improve. That hasn't been necessarily up to par. But from a receiver standpoint, yeah, Laporta's been a little slow to get going. I still totally believe in him. Amon-Ra is still really good. We've started to see the JMO breakout. Tim Patrick's looks solid. There isn't a lot of concerns there. Your running backs are really good. Like all the ingredients are there. And maybe there's been times where Ben Johnson gets too cute and outthinks himself or whatever. But as long as Jared Goff plays at the level that we know he's capable of, if he just plays like he did in most of the games last season, I think this will be one of the five best offenses in the NFL when it's all said and done. And that was our expectation.
Yeah, I mean, all of like Amon-Ra, you know what you're going to get from him. He's been very solid. Jameson Williams is on pace for 1,200 yards. So he's like, he might hit 1,000 yards this season just based on how he's played so far. Both running backs are going to be in the mix for 1,000 plus rushing yards, right? So, overall, everything has been good. It's just Goff that everything hinges on, and there's really like I don't have a ton to say about it. The Lions' offense is what we expected them to be, as far as how everyone else is playing around Goff, and it's just a matter of will it click. And I think it's starting to a little bit. So obviously we'll monitor it week by week. But if Goff plays like he did against Seattle, the Lions might never lose again. So
Yeah, it just seems to rise and fall by the caliber of play that you get from Goff each week. And otherwise, most other factors have, I think, come into expectation.
yeah, and so I'll focus more on the defense as a result because the offense is kind of is what it is. Defensively, this is where things get a little more interesting because the defensive line, for the most part, has played very well. Aiden Hutchinson has been on top of the world right now, and the interior pressure is getting home. But Edge 2 has been a concern, and I think it will continue to be a concern. Josh Pascal has done some good things against the run, still have not seen it as a pass rusher, and James Houston might just be cooked. There's really no one else that has stepped up in that role. So we'll see. We'll just have to kind of wait and see how that goes. Linebackers have been solid. I don't have any thoughts about them. But as far as the D line goes, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I think it pretty decently on the defensive line. Hutchinson's been what we expect. The other edge spot we had concerns about, and now we have magnified concerns with the Davenport injury, but that wasn't something you could come into the year and really say you're shocked by. We were considering it at the start of the year. This was a reclamation project on a guy with a lot of injuries, and rolled snake eyes there. Oh well, it's going to be the biggest storyline up to the trade deadline. It's going to be something talked about on 97.1 The Ticket here in Detroit every single day until the trade deadline. We can talk about that more as the weeks progress. I think they should address it to some degree, even just to get a body, because I just don't feel great about lining Ben Neiman up at edge in a playoff game. That doesn't feel super serious to me. But when Hutchinson is playing as well as he is, and you're getting interior pressure and you have blitz packages, I don't think pressure's been a major problem to date. It may be against a better OL, but we'll cross the bridge when we get there. The run defense has been stout as always. I don't think you can have a lot of complaints about the defensive line to this point. And linebackers, I think, have been pretty good too. I think Campbell has looked solid, and they were able to shoulder the Anzalone injury without too many issues. There's been some hit or miss in coverage from them, but the front six, as you would call it nowadays, pretty solid.
Yeah. Now, as for the trade front, I am going to just tell everyone to stop with this Max Crosby stuff until if something happens, obviously then I'll be over the moon ecstatic. But it's not happening. It's not going to happen. The Raiders are not going to trade their star player. I saw people also saying there was a few people that were saying like, "Oh, Max Crosby and Devonte Adams are coming to." It's like, no, guys, just no. The Lions are not ever going to trade a first round pick for a player like that, especially when they haven't even locked up most of their core to new contracts. If this was 2 years from now and everyone was locked up and they still had some cap room, okay, we can have that conversation. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, that's a long shot, but it makes for good radio conversation, and we got a lot of time to kill on talk radio.
Yeah, exactly. Now, probably the biggest concern that people have had, aside from edge two, has been corner, where Carlton Davis and Terrion Arnold have obviously gotten flagged a bunch this year. Terrion, in particular, has been a magnet for pass interference penalties. Now, it's a bit of a weird spot because both of them have been in position a lot, which is generally what you want to see. More so, the flags are fixable issues, but it doesn't seem like the Lions have too big of a grievance with how their corners have been playing in terms of their physicality and their handsiness. What do you expect to see from them like as we continue the year here?
I actually like the way Davis has played. I know he's been popping up on some of those stats about the most targeted and most allowed, blah 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 blah. I don't I don't care that much about that stuff. That's not really what I'm particularly looking for. And as a whole, I think it's been okay. Davis, I expect it'll just be a similar sort of level of play for him. I think for Arnold, I'm looking for him to improve and to just keep getting better, continue to be in good position, but progressively learn that you can't be that handsy, that you have to turn your head around, you have to not tug and grab and give the receiver a little space. You have to learn how to time it up and properly break the pass up rather than just sort of clutch and grab. It's a work in progress. Do you expect this with a rookie corner? I remember how really terrible Darius Slay was as a rookie corner back in the day. So it takes time. It unless you're Sauce Gardner and then it's just perfect right away, but not everyone can be that. And I just want to see him keep getting better. And that's what the biggest thing is. The defense needs to improve from last season by the time we get in the playoffs, because that's what this season's all
Yeah.
about. And there's a lot of weeks to go for him. And with Davis playing the way he's played, I think he's been solid. If Arnold can improve, then I think as a whole, feel okay about the corner position relative to last year, especially because I haven't had a lot of things about Mick Robertson either to really complain about.
Yeah. In Terrion's defense, if they flagged Sauce Gardner as much as they flagged him for the same kind of holdings, then Sauce Gardner would not be held in high regard, the regard that he is right now. And they called him a lot in London, and we saw how that ended up going for the Jets defense. So
Yeah, I think the best way to describe where the Lions are at the bye week is that we've sort of seen pieces of this team, of a complete team that is one of the best teams in football that can win the Super Bowl, that is more well-rounded than last year. We've had games where we felt like, wow, the defense is really good against Arizona and against to some degree Tampa as well. And then we've had games where we're like, wow, the offense was really good against Seattle. We're still waiting for that total complete game where they dominate on both sides. But I think there's been more legitimate flashes on D, and there's been flashes that the offense is just as good. And if you had a better D with last year's offense, you might have won the Super Bowl. And so I think there's a lot of things to be excited about, and I think they're on track so far.
yeah, exactly. Now, before we move on, do you have any thoughts on the coaching staff so far? Because I know that there's been some like fourth down calls that have been, cause for maybe criticism. Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn. Like, do you have any concerns there?
Uh, Not necessarily. Ben Johnson has his moments where he thinks he's trying to play eight-dimensional chess and isn't as smart as he thinks, and we talked about that last week with the pass decision leading to safety and the toss play. Like those issues happen, but you're rarely going to find a perfect offensive coordinator. Everyone's going to have a couple plays a game that just didn't work, and I have pretty good belief that he'll be able to put together a really good offense. And on the defensive side, not too many issues with Aaron Glenn so far. As a whole, they are 10th in scoring defense, something like 20 some or low 20s in total defense. small sample size. You only played a few games. They've played some good offensive teams like Arizona.
Seattle also skews that a lot with their 500
Yeah,
yards.
yeah, Seattle to some degree. I mean, Tampa's had a great offense this year. Rams, when they're healthy, is a pretty good offense. So they haven't had a Panthers meatball to pad those stats with. Maybe they'll get some opportunities for that later in the year. But I think overall the coaching staff's done a pretty solid job. It's I think if we got to the bye week previously at 3-1 before the season, you'd been told that. I think we would have been pretty happy as a whole.
Yeah,
You
that's what we
sat there
expected.
at the beginning saying, "Hey, I'd love to win all four," but it's really hard in the NFL to win. It's not college football. If you're the better team, you're not going to win the game 95% of the time. Like these games are really close. They're really thin margins, and if you win 3 out of 4, you'll finish 13-4, 12 out of 5, or 12-5, and that's usually enough to be a very high seed. And that's what we want.
Well, there's a reason that games that don't involve the Panthers are only ever like a 3 or 4 point spread, right? So,
Yeah,
the
exactly.
one the thing about Ben Johnson for me, whenever he gets too cute, I kind of just equate it to like Andy Reid syndrome, where there's just because you see it, once every 2 or 3 weeks with the Chiefs, where everyone gets in a circle and dances and sings "Kumbaya" before the play, and then something terrible happens for them because they all their trick plays just never work out because everyone knows it's coming. It's the same. Like Ben Johnson just gets too cute sometimes, and it is what it is. You're gonna have the same kind of thing where once every 2 or 3 games, there's a play that you're really gonna hate because it's just like, why did you do that? Why are you getting cute? Just go up the middle, run the ball with David Montgomery. Now, moving on from actually, we did have a mailbag question actually. So you want to get into that?
Oh yeah, well, so did a mailbag question at MGO blog, uh, a mailbag piece. So most of the stuff is Michigan football related as usual, but I like fielding questions on other topics. And there was one asking about the biggest obstacle to the Lions in the NFC. And so I thought this could be an interesting, if you and I both want to offer up our top three biggest threats in the NFC to the Lions making the Super Bowl. I'm curious because when I sat down, I thought like, man, there's a lot of possible options, but it's not really clear right now necessarily. So I'm curious what you have to say about this one.
I think uh, a fully healthy 49ers team is still, I think, the one that I'd be the most scared of because
That's what I said. Yeah.
they have the most complete roster on paper, and they have the best coaching staff that has a track record of success and has gotten to multiple Super Bowls. I think by default I kind of give it to the Niners, but given how the season has gone so far, man, it's tough because like I kind of have to say the Vikings by default because the Vikings defense is has been on like lighting the world on fire so far, and Brian Flores has done a very good job with that group, and they have looked like the biggest threats to the Lions for the NFC North crown. I don't even know if I can name a third aside from those two right now. Like maybe the Bucks, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. There's a lot of teams. It's interesting. You have a bucket of teams that you came into the year pretty high on, and their performance hasn't matched it. And then you have they have one team in particular that no one was high on, and the performance has been out of the water. And so, how do you balance those things out? I think you have to. I put Niners number one just because you have to be deferential to a team that's made the NFC Championship game 2 years in a row. Or is it was it 3 years in a row? Did they play in that when with Stafford, right? Didn't they?
Yep, they played with Stafford, and they also played against the Eagles,
Eagles, yeah. So is
with
that
no
three?
quarterback.
Yeah, so that
So,
three in a row. Yeah,
yeah.
man. So when you have that track record built up and you have the talent they have, you have to be respectful of that and rank them pretty high. But then I said Vikings and Packers maybe in a tie after that. I still believe in the Packers to some degree, even though I shouldn't based on the way they've played. They were really close to playing the NFC Championship game last year. They were in that game with the Niners. So those preseason expectations for me are still hanging. But I think if the Lions play the Vikes in a couple weeks and the Vikings outplay them and win that game, they're number one, no question. Like if they do that, then I think they move up. But I still just have enough of that concern from the preseason ranking to think, oh, maybe this is smoke and mirrors to hold them back. And then, as you said, after that, I think the Bucks are next. I think that Bucks team's looked really solid this season. And when you got a quarterback playing as well as Baker, you have to respect it.
Yeah. The thing is, like, the Commanders have been very good to start the year, but I have some trepidation about calling them legit because A, Jaden Daniels, rookie still. He's been great, but he is a rookie. And you have to imagine at some point teams are going to figure out what kind of makes him falter a little bit. Cliff Kingsbury, we also know, has a track record of falling off in the second half of the year. And so that offense as a whole is going to be under a microscope after week 9. And aside from that, like, I don't know. I might go so far as to say that after the Niners, the next like four biggest contenders to the Lions are all in the AFC. Like I'm a lot like if you get to the Super Bowl, there's
Oh,
like
yeah.
five teams that I would be terrified of. And it's just the nature of it. The NFC is a weaker conference than the AFC, and all of the biggest threats are over there, and you don't have to deal with them. So that's kind of to the Lions' benefit. And I don't know. It's just a weird way that the schedule's worked out so far. That the Lions are essentially the only NFC team that has performed at expectation. Everyone else is either way overperforming or way underperforming.
That's exactly what I said in the piece I put up, that if you do that sort of graph where on one axis you have preseason expectations, and the other axis you have performance to date, the Lions are the only one where it's kind of meeting where you'd expect it to. You have all these teams like Niners and Eagles, Cowboys, Packers, where we had some hope, and so far it's been a bit of a dud. And on the flip side, you have the Vikings, where no one had any hope, and now it's off the charts. And I think October is going to be fascinating. I think October is when we'll start to sort of separate some of these teams from pretenders and contenders. But so far, only 4 or 5 games into the season, it's just too early to totally weed it out. But being the one team where things are kind of going to plan isn't the worst place to be, and that's where we're at the moment.
Especially when those expectations were high to begin with,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
the expectations are a Super Bowl contender. So if you're meeting those expectations, I am not going to complain. Now, moving on to the Cowboys. This is a game that we know the Lions themselves have circled on their calendar after the infamous reported eligible fiasco at the end of the game in week 17 last year, where Taylor Decker catches a 2 point conversion and it's flagged for an eligible receiver because he supposedly did not report as eligible because the Lions tried to confuse the Cowboys by sending multiple linemen over, and there was some confusion on the play. The refs got it wrong. They were too stubborn to admit that, and as a result, the Lions lost that game. Didn't end up having any consequence in the long run because the Cowboys lost in the wildcard round to the Packers, but it did end up resulting in the Cowboys being the 2 seed over the Lions. So again, it all worked out, and the Lions got their 2 games, but this is the one that the Lions have circled on their calendar, trying to get revenge. How are we feeling going into this game?
Pretty good. This is coming off a bye week. Remember last year, the Lions defense wasn't as good off the bye week, but the offense was as sharp as it ever was in that game against the Chargers. It's quite possibly the healthiest you will be the rest of the season until maybe the playoffs. So that's a reason for optimism. I know Brian Branch is back practicing. Uh, Ragnow's back practicing as well. So you're going to be pretty darn healthy. And I haven't been overly impressed with this Cowboys team. And the Lions, I think, are a 3.5 point favorite at the moment on the road, which says quite a bit. So, I feel pretty decent at the moment.
Well, health being one of the biggest factors, the Cowboys appear to be without both Micah Parsons and Demarcus Lawrence, their 2-star edge rushers, and their third edge, Marshawn Kneeland, is also looking like he'll be out for this game. So the Cowboys are very beat up. It is going to be Osa Odigizua and his merry band of men trying to hold down the fort against the Lions' rushing attack, but that is not going to be enough on its own, probably, because as of right now, the Cowboys are 32nd in defensive rush EPA and 31st in rush DVOA. Their pass defense per EPA is 19th, and and per DVOA is 18th. This is not a good defense so far, and this is one of the worst run defenses in the league, aside from a little blip on the radar against Devin Singletary and the Giants. The Lions should be able to run the ball, and they should be able to run the ball all day against the Cowboys, especially if Ragnow is back. So
Was Dan Quinn the whole defense? What's going on with that? I mean, I know they've
the
had injuries now at edge, but no, that's not been the whole season. It's been shockingly bad to me, from a defensive standpoint. It was they got a little bit of a reprieve against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but the Lions are a far cry from that. And this is a matchup where you should really be licking your chops and feeling pretty good about your ability to move the ball, put up a lot of points, and not necessarily necessary, but they'd definitely be good because this is still a talented offense and they still have some weapons. So if you can really put it in a situation where it's the Cowboy offense has to keep scoring, 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 scoring to keep up with you, I like your chances in that situation because you'll eventually get enough stops.
Yeah, and going back to the both EPA and DVOA, the Cowboys do not have a unit that's ranked in the top half of the league.
Ugh.
They are 17th or worst at everything. They are the number one special teams,
Okay.
but as far as the things that matter, they are not in the top half of the league. And it's gonna really come down to because they don't really have a running game. It's Rico Dowdle, Ezekiel Elliott, Deuce Vaughn. Like they have kind of a hodgepodge backfield by committee, an offensive line that is hardly inspiring, two tackles in particular, Terrence Steele and Guyton, that have been very bad. That while they are the starters, this is the first time Hutchinson's going to go against a starting tackle this year. Both are probably worse than the reserves that have been playing for other teams. There's no excuse to lose this game, quite frankly. Like I'm just gonna say it that there is no excuse to lose this game. The Lions should be heavily motivated because of what happened at the end of last year. They are coming off a bye week. They are as healthy as can be. They are the better team on paper. Everything is in your favor. The way the Cowboys are constructed is to pass the ball and stop the pass, and that plays into the Lions' favor because they are a running team. Although the Cowboys are also still going to be without one of their star corners, Deron Bland. So just go win, go run the ball.
Yeah, you look at this Cowboys team last year, they had, I think, a better wide receiver situation than they have at the moment. CeeDee Lamb's really good. He cooked the
One of the
Lions
best.
in that, yep,
Yeah.
in that game, but I'm not that scared of Jalen Tolbert or Cavante Turpin. I mean, last year they had what Cooks and Gallup were their other two. I mean that's just a different sort of caliber to me on paper. And Terrence Ferguson or Jake Ferguson, Terrence is the guy at Oregon. Jake Ferguson is a tight end. Okay, like there are
Good red zone
okay. Well,
threat.
yeah, like there are some players here. I think Dak's a pretty good quarterback in the regular season, but nothing that really blows you away outside of CeeDee Lamb. And when you have those OL issues, this is yeah, coming out of a bye. This is a game you want to win, and you feel like you should win. You get it in the bag, then you're 4-1. You're only one game back in Minnesota, headed in to the big clash where the leader or the winner of that game leaves the building with the NFC North lead. So that's what you want to get to. And there's as you mentioned, a redemption arc from last season. And did they lose there the year before too? Wasn't that like the
Yeah, but that was the start of the year when they were horrible. Like they still had Hawkinson on the roster at that
yeah? But they
point.
almost won that game, right? They or they were in it for a while. Didn't
They were in it until like the last 5 minutes, like or
and then
like
didn't like Jamal Williams fumble on like the half-yard line as he was going into the end zone.
which shout out to Marcus Lawrence. That was an all pro play by him on that one.
So it's a place you've gone into a couple times in a row and not come out with a win. So I think that should be an extra piece of motivation. So I'm feeling pretty good about this game, and it's nice to be a 4 o'clock window, America's game of the week. You always want to beat the Cowboys given those circumstances.
Oh, game of the week. Does that mean we're subjected to Brady or Romo commentary?
It's Fox, so it'll be Brady.
Oh yay, Whippy. I'm
I
so
honestly haven't
excited.
seen that much of him this year, so I haven't gotten the full experience. I'll report back next week and see what I
Yeah,
think.
exactly. But yeah, this is a game that for the Lions they should win. If they don't, we're gonna have to come back here next week and talk about what went wrong, which I'm assuming will start and end with CD Lamb dominating again. Um, yeah, I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts on this game?
Not particularly. Cowboys always a fun team to beat, and I hope they do it.
Yeah, and it would be the first time in a little bit that the Lions, similarly to Seattle, had a little bit of trouble with Dallas over the years, so this will be one that's a little bit more important. But yeah, anyways, guys, thank you all for listening or watching if you're on YouTube. Be sure to follow the show, follow us on social media. We'll check back with you next week after this game. In the meantime, let's go, Lions. Have a good rest of your day. Go enjoy the football this weekend or hockey if you're a hockey fan. We'll see you guys next time. Cheers.